Hey, hello
Hey,
everyone.
hey.
Welcome to October's final edition of Empathy Power Up, your 15-minute power up for the week, where you get the empathy boost we all need and get to grow a little and learn. And in October, we've been talking about generational trauma, and we invite you to recap and watch the previous episodes from October, which has been just, I think, the highlight of my empathy power up experience of learning and growth. And Amy has just done an incredible job of researching and bringing that content to us. So first, thank you, Amy, for doing that. It's
Thank
been
you.
incredible. And something that really stands out for today's episodes that we're focusing on is this quote by Resma, and it's trauma doesn't mean we're defective. In fact, it means just the opposite. Something happened to us, which is something we can heal from. And I think that's so powerful. I think trauma is something that if we understand makes us stronger, makes us better. And then in our conversations in last week's episode, Rasma further talked about the racialized trauma, and then you shared all that information with us and the context and helped us understand that the trauma shows up differently based on your race: white bodies, black bodies, police bodies. And for example, if you're a white American, your body has probably inherited a different legacy of trauma that affects white bodies, and at times may rekindle old flight, flee, or freeze responses. And these go back centuries, at least as far back as the Middle Ages, and has been passed down from one white body to another for dozens of generations. And then on the other side, whenever a group has been oppressed and victimized and brutalized or marginalized, they pass on their trauma down to generation after generation. And it's this example we talked about, and I think Amy put it really well, was this historical trauma has been likened to a bomb going off over and over again as we pass it down from one generation to other. And it happens to all of us. And once, I think the big takeaway is we need to realize how that's come through our generations, and not blame ourselves, but understand it and see how we can heal from it. And that's what we want to talk about today. And we're going to go deep into that today. So, Amy, I am excited to continue this learning journey and learn about how we work towards healing from trauma, especially around this idea of generational trauma.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for that great recap. Um, so there I started to talk about a little bit about healing from trauma last week. And so today I'm going to do a little bit deeper into kind of like the stages of healing from trauma. I think that after reading Resma's book, Resma Menakam's book, My Grandmother's Hands, Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps Score, soaking up everything trauma related the past few months, it just got us into this place where and what they say is that you can heal from trauma, and with the right guidance, all of us need to heal, right? And with the right guidance, we can. And I love that quote of like, trauma doesn't mean we're defective. And what's interesting though is that like therapy, recovering from trauma affects everyone differently. So, your ability to heal from trauma depends on factors like your beliefs and perceptions,
Mhm.
your level of coping and resiliency. So, if you've dealt with a lot of trauma in the past, and how you've dealt with the trauma really shows up. I saw that a lot in the research of the book, is that if people have experienced trauma over and over again and haven't healed that trauma, then they're not full capacity, right?
Mm.
And you see that over and over again. But if you have healed from the trauma and haven't just like dissociated your brain and your mind from it, and you've actually gone past it and recovered from it, you become stronger. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. It also involves like your connection to people who are supporting you. So if
Mhm.
you feel like you're doing a lot of these things alone, it's going to affect you the way the community around you is going to affect how you deal with it. And then also your own psychological functioning before the event. So, what this healing journeys can do, there's different modalities. It helps you to live in the present without being overwhelmed by thoughts and feelings that you have of that event. So you want to try to get into It's a process that you work through over time and is intentional in stages. So you can start controlling the emotions that you have rather than reacting. So I talk about responding rather than reacting. So the first stage of recovery is called safety. Is like safety, stability, and overcoming dysregulation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you're recovering from trauma. You're reestablishing your feelings of safety. So, we last week we talked about on one side, there's safety in the Gestalt theory, there's safety on one side, and then there's also growth on the other. So when we do go through a lot of changes, some changes could be traumatic, right? In the workplace, right? So we have this underlying belief and feeling that we need to be safe. So trying to figure out what's a good sense of safety, how secure we feel. We're also trying to manage those symptoms that you have with flashbacks or nightmares that you might have with post-traumatic stress disorder or like complex PTSD, which is what I have. And I talked about that in a couple sessions ago. So we're trying not to re-trigger ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then after that is this second phase, which is you're remembering, mourning, and coming to terms with those moments, right? You're looking back on the experience. This is where a lot of healing modalities come in very well. We have there's other therapies called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, a specific kind of therapy. There's also cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral
Mm-hmm.
therapy, and you can use these methodologies to understand, what happened in the past to you and how that shows up currently with you. So that you can see that a lot in like the workplaces and the places we've been. And do you have any like kind of
Yeah.
insights that and thoughts with that? I'll pause right here. Just
Yeah.
give me some
So
insight.
this especially talking about workplace, I experienced workplace trauma and abuse from, well, one of my manager leader at a previous company that I worked at, um and the smallest sign, like if I see someone who just looks like that person, I am triggered, and it I go into a
Mm,
very dark place. And so I still think I'm not healed, and I'm still working on finding a way to heal through that. But
mm,
I did some work over 2020, um, healing from childhood trauma and working through those and understanding those and understanding. And now I feel so much clearer, better as I understand that trauma, and I feel that I've come out of it a better person, grown out of it. And so I love what you said about that's growth and safety aspect. In that, yes, right now, like if I go into the context of the person, I block them on LinkedIn and the previous manager, and so I don't get to see any of their,
mhm,
even don't come up. But at any point, a lot of things remind me of it. So I still am probably stuck in that safe place versus that growth in this experience. And I'm still working towards that. And because it was such a big hit to me. And then it was surprise, shock, and I got to the darkest point in my adult life in my 30s was that point. So I'm
mm,
still working on it.
mm.
So I think uh,
Yeah,
all these absolutely, and I need to do the work.
yeah, yeah. And I think about that too. It's like I want to be surrounded by people who are doing the work
Mhm.
and are, if there's this belief that we have of like you are going into these spaces, you're hurting because you've had trauma, but then you go into a space of healing, and then at the end of the day you go to a space of helping other people, right?
Mhm.
It's that growth area. And in one of my programs that I support groups, we really focus on those aspects of it. And I think these four stages that of the healing journey really tap into that. The next stage, once you kind of like, in a way, you have that sense of safety and stability. You've
Mhm.
gone through the remembering and mourning
Mhm.
and coming to terms with things, feeling those feels. Like anger is an issue, something that I've had to get in touch with as well with this work. is then you start thinking about, okay, I've processed a lot of these things. I've gone through them in community with other people. You might not be able to get a therapist. That was certainly great. But there's also people that you really trust in your life you can reach out to as well, that might be good, like listeners or
Hmm.
people that you can engage with. You're reintegrating in this new phase of trying to figure out, how do I want to show up differently, right, in the world? And there's not really a right or wrong way here. It's just trying to figure out, now that I've seen and examined all these different aspects of it, how do I start nurturing myself,
Hmm.
and feeling that I can, one of my favorite things is by Tara Brach. I mentioned her last week briefly, but she talks about rain. She talks about, when you're meditating, think about recognizing, having, allowing it to be there, like examining it and just kind of looking at it and nurturing yourself at the end of the day. So those are certainly some ways that you can kind of reintegrate. And then the last thing, which I think is so important here, is a lot of research shows that we have post traumatic growth, or
Hmm.
PTG.
Hmm.
So not only do we, if we go through a traumatic experience, and if we don't heal it, right, if we don't go through these steps, we actually, it gets worse, right, and our experiences get worse, our personality, sometimes it shows up as personality, and our culture gets really bad, right. But if you do go through the experience of healing and turning inward and figuring how you're going to reintegrate, you do
Hmm.
have a space of post traumatic growth. And so that's kind of like positive psychological changes. Other ways, like, you're like, you come out of this and you're like, oh, you have positive outlook on life, for
Hmm.
example. Or even things where you're like, you know what, when the next thing comes around, I've certainly experienced this myself, when um, a setback came most recently in my life. And I've talked to you about this, Kevin, but it just took me a few days to come back from it instead of
Mm.
several months, right?
I
So I was like, you
see.
know what? It gives me perspective on this world. And so it's not about returning to life as it was before the experience, but instead to shift in thinking about how you relate to the world as we
Mm.
go forward. So, you know and recovery from trauma is like a testament to the strength and tenacity of our human spirit,
Hmm.
and the secret to living this a life in purpose and meaning, right, which
Mm.
sounds kind of like, high in the sky, but
Yeah.
I think that's so essential to what we're doing here.
Yeah, I like what you said. It is part of our human experience, recovery from trauma. So leaning into that. And I think I'm somewhere between stage 3 and stage 4 in my process of healing, and I'm still working on that.
Hmm.
And I thank you for sharing your, like you said, once you've had a setback and then you can work on it, it's easier to do that because now you're well prepared or you understand it better. But can you share a little bit more about your somatic healing journey as well?
Of course, of course. So, one modality that I'm testing out, I'm doing a series of them in the coming months to continue my healing journey, because
Hmm.
I've been on it for many years now, is called somatic healing.
Hmm.
And somatic healing is the soma is like your body and how you react to it. And we do know that, your body stores trauma. So, over the years, because I have complex PTSD, I actually have not just one traumatic experience, but many throughout my life
Hmm.
that I'm trying to recover from.
Hmm.
And so it is very complex. That's why it's called complex PTSD. So I have learned over time to dissociate, and in what we and I am definitely not a therapist here, but I've learned so much in my journey. But I just shut my feelings off, and
Mm.
that has given me incredible leverage to build incredible things and to do things like work in startup environments and shut off my feelings so
Mhm.
that I can just get that work done.
Mhm.
But it continues to create harm, like I was saying before. If you don't
Mm.
heal those things, you're going to keep hurting yourself, right, and hurting the people around you.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what, I feel like the next step for me is to go to the somatic healer. And I've been doing it for about 1 month now. Tomorrow will be my 1 month anniversary. And what she does during those meetings is not for me to talk, right? And to like, sometimes I talk a lot because I'm anxious, but to feel how I feel. And
Mm,
last week I was, actually 2 weeks ago, I was triggered
mm,
from a package delivery that went wrong.
mhm,
And I knew right before I went into it, I went into the session, and then I could see in that session that I was triggered not just from that, but the construction that was happening behind me. And it wasn't really, really loud to the common person, but because I was already like in a heightened sense of triggeredness, if you will,
sure,
I
yeah.
was very triggered. I it just was grating on me, right? And so
Mm,
she said, and she was like observing me, and they have these things called pendulations, and that means that you've gone from one extreme of being very, very triggered to trying to calm yourself down. And that's what
mm.
somatic experience is, being like giving yourself the tools so that when you are in that heightened state, you can bring yourself back to
Ah,
equilibrium,
that's incredible.
right? So in that first 20 minutes, I had 6 pendulations. And she was like, that is a lot that you just did. In 20 minutes, I essentially went from extreme to extreme in
Mm.
just in 20 minutes. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my goodness, I do this every single day, right?
Ah,
I'm so sensitive to the world around me, and I'm an empath. I'm a highly sensitive person that I just am not always aware of what's around me because I'm just going from one thing to another.
mm.
And so, hence the idea of mindfulness, that we could probably talk for an entire month about mindfulness, but getting into that space of having awareness, being mindful of the experience that you're going through so that you can figure out how other people are experiencing you and you're feeling confident and helpful yourself. So that's a
Yeah,
little bit about my story, and I'm so excited for that journey ahead and
yeah.
other things I'm going to be doing.
So incredible month of learning, and thank you for sharing this.
Mhm.
And what's amazing is, Amy, you haven't just stopped there. You are starting up a new program to help people with workplace trauma. I would love. What is
Yep.
that about? Tell us, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the future, by the way, we should have these be 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes
We can.
because we're just like, and then we'll
2022
turn it
will be a
25. We'll just
20-minute
get bigger.
power up.
It'll just get bigger and bigger every month, every week. Um, yes. So I have had this dream for years. Back in when I was working in the federal government, I was doing some work around creating support and seeing that change makers really need other people to talk to. And doing this trauma work myself, doing this research on trauma, has led me to really, and seeing the big resignation, the great resignation that's happening right now. So many people are unhappy. So we're testing out in our collaborative, and you're a member of that, Kevin, and some other members of our collaborative are going to be testing out a support group for dysfunctional workplaces. And so exciting, and it's just trying to figure out, it's all free to come to. We're testing it out in the month of November. At the end of November, we're going to be having kind of like an open call for people to start testing it out with us. In a bigger way. So if there's something that's something that interests you, and being in community with others, it's not a 12-step program. It is a program just being in community with others and figuring out and becoming stronger together so that on the other side we can fight this bigger system that is holding us down.
Oh,
So,
what an incredible movement. I cannot wait to experience this. And so, everyone, keep it track. Towards the end of November, you'll see more information about it. And
yep.
it's an incredible opportunity for us to come together, not only to talk about and understand our dysfunctional workplaces, but how to drive systemic change overall as well. So,
Yep.
this is incredible. Thank you so much for an amazing month, a gift that you have given this world, to me,
Thank
to
you.
our audience. And folks, we will be out next week. So we're taking a break next week after this very heavy month. But we'll be back the week after, and we'll be in November. We'll do we're planning on not doing the full all November with all the holidays and everything in plan, but we're going to have some fun in November and talk a little bit about how do we appreciate people in workplace and workplace appreciation, and dive into some tactics around that. Please message us, Amy or me, or comment on this if you have questions, if you want to dive deeper into any of the topics we talked about, or any topics you want us to dive in deeper, we would love to help you, bring you that boost of empathy power that we all need every week.
Of course, of course. And I want to say hi to Rajat, who just
Yeah.
mentioned and said hi to us.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, Rajat. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and everybody else who's watching this after the session, I'm so grateful that you tuned into this and are learning more about trauma. And it's now one of my favorite topics to talk about. So, thank you again. Thank you, Kevin. I will catch you all soon. Take care.